The day has finally arrived. Happy Halloween. Now, first and foremost, I hope everyone is doing well. I hope that regardless of how you're celebrating Halloween, whether you're dressing up or hanging out with friends or preferably watching a horror movie, that you're getting the absolute most out of it, and that is the most important thing. Now, this Halloween has been a blast. We've covered everything from Poe to mad scientists and the spook shows to urban legends and scary stories. But now it really all culminated in why I'm doing these videos in the first place and why I am into the things that I'm into. That being horror and science fiction, monster movies, and the like. And I'm a firm believer in the notion that what you're exposed to as an adolescent, and especially an early adolescent, determines what you're into in the future, determines what you're a fan of. For instance, if you grew up in a family of people who watch sports, not necessarily guaranteed, but you most likely are going to become a fan of sports as well. That sort of thing. And for me, and with my story and how I got into the things that I am into today, it was really my first, really, well, I guess you're going to say my earliest memory, rather, that being a nightmare. Yes, my earliest memory is a nightmare. And this nightmare is actually, it's pretty corny, I guess you're gonna say, and strange when I say it, but at the time when I did have the nightmare, it terrified and petrified me in every single way to the point that it made me crave a feeling of terror, if that makes sense. But basically, the nightmare was me getting chased, which is terrifying alone, but what was I getting chased by? And that being a green robe. Now, yeah, pretty weird, pretty unexpected, I guess, but mostly stupid. But at the time, I thought it was really, really terrifying, and mainly because it was just moving so bizarrely. It was moving very in a weird kind of erratic way, and it was just the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen at that point. And the movement of the green robe chasing me, which, of course, regardless of what you're chased by, if an impending doom is present, then it doesn't really matter what you're getting chased by. It's terrifying regardless, nonetheless. And so that damn green robe was chasing me all over my house, and mind you, in my dream, before I even saw the green robe chasing me, I felt so alone and isolated, which was odd because at that time in my life, obviously as a young child, at least somebody was at the house with me. If it wasn't my parents, it was my siblings. If it wasn't my siblings, it was my parents, that sort of thing. And so I just felt so alone, which was unusual for me enough and pretty unnerving in its own right. But to see this bizarre robe entity chase after me, that was really unexpected, and I think that's what made it scary at the time, was just how unexpected it was. If it was something more common, such as maybe a ghost type figure, I guess that would make sense, but a robe? Pretty interesting, yet pretty funny when I say it, but very interesting. Now, what most impacted me about this nightmare was not necessarily the robe. That didn't really scare me. It did scare me more so with just the fact that it was chasing me. The fact that I was getting chased scared me enough. The road wasn't necessarily so scary, and that was really something that factored into why I became so terrified. Was just the feeling itself. It was so new. The fear and adrenaline. It was something that after the dream had taken place and I woke up, thankfully, I wanted to replicate that feeling of terror once more. And without even knowing it fully at the time, I just craved that feeling of getting scared. Now, interestingly enough, at the same time, and even, of course, afterwards growing up, my siblings pranked me a lot. And I'm not so sure if the incidents that I'm going to essentially tell you right now are planned or were planned, but they sure as hell did scare the crap out of me, and I don't know if they took place on the same Halloween night or if it was separate. Probably separate years because I remember one more so than I recall the other, so there's that. But in the first instance, I remember being taken to a park around Halloween time. I was in costume, everyone else was in a costume, and I remember feeling this strange, dreadful feeling that for some reason everybody at that area wanted to scare me. Which obviously didn't, it just doesn't make any sense because why would everyone want to scare me? Unless they were all in on it, but that's just such a sick joke, and even that, I'm sure that would just happen so rarely. It's kind of impossible to get so many people together, let alone even a few people together on a plan sometimes. But it's just so strange because I remember being at this park, and these pictures, by the way, are from that exact park, and I saw these people walking down a hill, and I was parallel to it, and it looked as if they were looking at me dead in the eyes, and they were carrying chainsaws, they were carrying axes, they were carrying other tools, which obviously hinted at getting mutilated, and I don't know why it just stuck out to me in a very strange way, and I'm literally stumbling over my words because it's just, when I think about it, it's just so strange. And that was basically that, and I was terrified. I was screaming, I was crying, I was yelling. Obviously, my siblings after that they were in some serious trouble, thankfully. But again, I felt that same kind of adrenaline. It wasn't as terrified as I was in my nightmare, but it was something. The second instance probably was the following year, if I'm being honest. I was taken to a remote area where there must have been a Halloween party happening, and I remember seeing someone dancing in a Ghostface costume, obviously from the Scream films. Ghostface, one of the most iconic slashers of all time. In fact, if you don't know, Ghostface, or the original Scream film, which Wes Craven directed, who also directed Nightmare on Elm Street, he actually intended to kill off the slasher subgenre, if you will. But in doing so, he spawned a whole load of slasher teen movies of the late 90s and early 2000s, and most of them were just god awful. So there you go. But Scream was such a huge thing back then, even in the 2000s, which I recall. And just seeing this person, and again, it felt as if everyone was just trying to scare me here. I saw this person dancing in the Ghostface costume with the unnerving kind of gaping mouth and the Grim Reaper style appearance, basically, just dancing, and it just, again, very erratic. I don't know why, but erratic movement really terrified the hell out of me as a kid. Even today, there's just something so unnerving about it because it's just so unnatural, just erratic movement. I don't know what it is, but just seeing that person in Ghostface costume dancing erratically just really, really sent shivers down my spine. And of course, I was screaming, crying, yelling. I was doing all these things, and of course, why wouldn't I? It terrified the hell out of me. And again, my siblings got in some serious trouble once again. This is, of course, the mid 2000s. And another example that I'm thinking of, it's funny, the more I think about my childhood, and of course, obviously, the more you think about a certain situation or a time in your life, more things come to you the longer you think about it. One instance was, well, it was a couple instances, but I wasn't really scared at this, but I did get kind of freaked out. But I remember my cousins would always freak me out with jump scares. Of course, jump scares were much bigger back in the 2000s as they are today, thankfully. I think jump scares are just so cheap, but that's just my opinion. But back then they were pretty effective because they were rather new, I guess. You had the Scary Maze game, which is a classic. You had that notorious driving commercial with the car, and then the thing. Um, it was fun. YouTube back then. I think 2006 to 2012 YouTube was just a gold mine, honestly. But I remember getting scared by my cousins, who were at the time huge fans of metal and horror, which are two things that I love today, which is funny. And they just scared the crap out of me by showing me those videos. Not only that, but also those videos where it was a death metal or thrash metal song accompanied with footage from a horror movie. Really spooky stuff to me at the time. And there's that. Now, other than being scared, I slowly became a fan of this stuff more and more, even though I didn't even watch any of the films. But I was aware of that. I was aware of all those things. And noticeably, one example of me developing an infatuation with monster movies in general, too, not just horror, but also just traditional monster movies, was I was sitting with my father one time on the couch, and we were just flipping through channels, seeing what was on. We were on Stars, which obviously they show a lot of films, mostly classics and whatnot. But I remember seeing this 5 second. This must have gone on for 5 to 10 seconds, I want to say. But I remember seeing, and before this, I was a huge dinosaur guy, and I still am. huge dinosaur kid. I love dinosaurs. I had so many dinosaur toys. And when I saw this, I didn't get scared due to this, but I got so fascinated. I saw a giant monster, and you all know where this is going. I saw a giant monster basically rip apart a whole city. And this was the beginning of Godzilla versus Destroyer, where burning Godzilla just wreaks havoc on Hong Kong, the 22nd Godzilla movie, and a really great film. Definitely a great finale for a particular era in the Godzilla series, Heisei era. I thought it was fantastic, and that blew me away. I was taken aback by it because it was just so great, and I was just blown away. I don't know what to say. And of course, I began to adopt the terminology of the movies. Oh, Godzilla. Oh, that's Godzilla. Okay, and of course I call every dinosaur Godzilla because I was a kid, of course. And there's that. That was interesting. And so, as my fascination with monster movies and horror movies continued, I personally I just wouldn't stop talking about it because I just wanted to know what these movies were about. They seem so interesting to me because partially, I guess one of the reasons why I was so interested is because it just, those films felt as if I shouldn't be watching them. So that only heightened my interest even more. Of course, if you tell someone not to do something, they'll probably do it, especially if they're a child. And naturally, my parents caught wind of that really quickly. They caught wind of the fact that I was talking about these movies a lot, the fact that I was developing an interest in things that are scary. I don't know why. I loved Halloween way more now, and that was that. And so my cousins, who, as previously mentioned, are huge horror fans, and they really still are, they told my parents about a certain channel that they thought little Dennis would be interested in. And so we came home. They told us what the channel number was for the TV, and yeah, it was pretty amazing. And this is actually the exact clip that I saw when I stumbled across this channel after them telling me about this.
Come, enter if you dare, because all the famous monsters, mutants, and madmen have a new home. Yours. Monsters HD, the first and only all-horror movie channel. Uncut, uninterrupted, and in high definition. All day, all nightmare. And for even more ferocious thrills, go to monsterstv.com. See fangs, claws, and chainsaws sharper than ever. Monsters HD. It's alive.
Yeah, that was absolutely amazing. And of course, at that point, it just blew my mind. I was thinking to myself, who the hell was that guy with the clawed glove? Who was the guy with the pins in his head? Oh, look, it's the monster that I saw destroying the city way back when. Is that Godzilla? Probably is. It sure looks like it. Who was the guy in the strange white mask? Obviously, the hockey mask. I was taken aback by it because it was just so great. And I was just blown away. I don't know what to say. And of course, I began to adopt the terminology of the movies. Oh, Godzilla. Oh, that's Godzilla. Okay, and of course I call every dinosaur Godzilla because I was a kid, of course. And there's that. That was interesting. And as you can imagine, that was it. Monsters HD became a huge part of my daily routine. I was watching monster and horror movies anytime that I could, basically. And it just took over my life for a pretty substantial period of time when I was a kid. And it was so incredible seeing that. And Monsters HD was one of those horror-oriented television type products, I guess you can say. It is really the first, and as far as I know, the only horror channel that was just dedicated to horror, really. It was the only channel dedicated to horror that showed horror 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Incredible stuff. And it showed me everything. It showed me everything from the 30s and 40s with the Universal monsters and the classic black and white atmospheric horror movies, which I've grown to love so much. It showed me the 50s monster movies, which I also love dearly, the 70s and 80s slasher movies, and everything in between. Vividly, I can recall, I believe my first movie that I saw on Monsters HD was actually Puppet Master. It was the 1989 Charles Band Puppet Master about the killer puppets, and you have the Puppet Master Pinhead and Blade and everything, and really, really cool characters. I loved it. And I recall also seeing Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster from 1965. I can't watch the movie today because it's just so bad and just so abysmal in every way. But back then, I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. You see, you have this weird Frankenstein type monster attack this space gorilla looking demonic. I don't even know. It was great. Really cheesy fun. A lot of Frankenstein. I remember watching a lot of Frankenstein from that channel as well. Frankenstein 1970 with Boris Karloff. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which I believe was my first Universal monster movie. It was either that or The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I also saw quite a lot. And some of the best was actually the marathons that they had. They actually had Godzilla marathons every now and then. And usually they would show Godzilla in 1985. Obviously, Godzilla 1985 is the American version of the Japanese Return of Godzilla from 1984. It's basically the same movie, but the Americans cut it up and they gave their own spin on it, just as they did with the very first Godzilla film from the 50s. So that was that. And I'm not really a fan of the 85 cut nowadays, but back then I loved it. And even today, I still think of it very fondly because I remember the exact night that I was watching it. Not necessarily the date, but just the overall setting. It was nighttime. It was just basically everyone was out of the house, and it was just great because it's one of those movies that it's just best to watch in the dim, kind of eerie hours of the night. It's a very gritty movie. Basically, every shot looks dark and abysmal with an overcast sky, and you see Godzilla with the apocalyptic destruction with the night sky turning red due to all the fire. It's a pretty dark movie, and I fell in love with it. It's not my favorite Godzilla movie, but it certainly is one of the greatest, and probably was the first actual Godzilla movie that I saw in full. Pretty life-changing experience in a way. Unfortunately, however, Monsters HD's luck ran out. In January of 2009, it essentially came to an end. There was some sort of legal issue that happened, which enabled the provider to just cease operations and just stop Monsters HD in its entirety, which is a shame. And as a result, I was just heartbroken. I didn't really comprehend it because it just disappeared, and my comprehension and grasp of legal issues, and I didn't keep up with any announcements. This was 2009, and I was dissatisfied with the fact that it just disappeared from TV one day. And that was it. I remember seeing so many films on Monsters HD. It was certainly amazing. I never missed a day. Almost. In fact, sometimes I even missed school because I would stay up all night watching those movies. I saw The Blob, the original, as well as the remake. I saw Phantasm. I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, many of the slashers. I saw John Carpenter's The Thing. It's just From Beyond. It's absolutely incredible. There's so many great films on there. A lot of 50s monster movies. Tarantula, of course. It was just absolutely incredible. I really enjoyed seeing Tarantula on Monsters HD. Although I will say, I do hope that Monsters HD in some capacity does actually manage to come back, but it was a big part of my childhood and is a huge reason why I grew to love the things that I love today. Even as I got older, those movies and icons really shaped who I was becoming. In fact, at one point, I didn't really see anyone else as my friends, and I really didn't feel as if I had any friends other than the monsters and horror villains that I saw on my TV screen late at night. It was a pretty surreal thing, but honestly, I feel that there is quite a bit of meaning in there. Now, of course, without watching those movies, I probably wouldn't be an aspiring filmmaker, which I am today. And that just goes to show how significant and influential those movies are to me today, and likely always will be. One particular film that I can think of, which there are quite a few, but I believe the most influential to me personally is 1968's Night of the Living Dead. This film, I really, really can go on for many hours about. I love it quite a bit, but it taught me so much about independent filmmaking overall. It was made on a pretty modest budget, but at the same time, everything about the film just it's just so magical in a way. Especially the scene when Johnny and Barbara walk into the cemetery and you see, while vintage stock music is playing, you see the camera tilt from the tree, basically just in kind of a worm's eye view camera angle, looking at something, and essentially it makes it bigger, that kind of perspective, and then it just tilts down to Johnny and Barbara walking into the cemetery. And I don't know why, but there's just something so noir and something so dramatic and just incredible about that one shot alone. I thought it was fantastic. And those things like that from that film and that overall production, I knew right then and there I wanted to be a filmmaker. And this was around 2014, 2015 or so. So about 6 or 7 years ago, too. Could have been 2013. But yeah, Night of the Living Dead played a major role in my life and continues to do so as well, along with dozens of other films. Overall, though, horror is in my blood. It's something that's just in my blood. There's really no other way to describe it. It is something that I love very much. I find it very compelling. There can be a lot of social commentary implemented in it as well, so it does have quite a bit of value. It's a genre which I think is very strong because it really conveys the themes that people just don't like to talk about, which goes back to the social commentary notion as well. It grosses you out, it can chill you to the bone, it can scare you, but overall, if you're watching the right kind of horror movie, it can also make you think, and those are, in my opinion, the best horror movies ever made, really. Of course, there's a whole list of them, but overall, that's a story for another video. Even though at face value it was just a robe basically chasing me around, which isn't necessarily inherently scary, but the fear that I felt in that dream scared me more than anything. And that fear put me in a huge rabbit hole. I became easy to scare, and therefore, the more I got scared, the more interested I got. And therefore, the more interested I got, the more movies that I watched, and Monsters HD, and other outlets on YouTube, and buying DVDs basically almost every weekend. It was a really, really good experience, and I really do miss that period of my childhood. And I love and miss that period of my childhood so much that I'm not letting go of it, and I don't see why I should let go of it. I think if you enjoy something and you're not hurting anyone in the process, continue to do it. Of course, you should know your limit. Obviously, horror is not the only thing that I'm into. I'm into quite a lot of things as well, but it is really the core of what I'm into. And I think that's what's really important too, is if you understand your likes, interests, and tastes, then you can utilize all those likes, interests, and tastes and make something very beautiful out of it. And if possible, and if lucky enough, use your career and mesh it with what you love. And that's just a key to success, really. One last thing though, I understand that horror movies and monster movies are very niche. They're not as popular or as, I guess you can say, box office breaking, if that's even a term, as superhero movies, for example. But just because something is niche doesn't mean it's irrelevant. If monster movies and horror movies were irrelevant, they wouldn't be remaking them or rebooting them every 10 or 15 seconds. So, really, what's niche and what's irrelevance, honestly? You could argue that there is a certain coolness in liking something that's under the radar or even misunderstood. It really opens your eyes to more perspectives and opens a huge area of life that many people don't really think about. However, I would absolutely love to hear your stories and Halloween stories, if you have any, down in the comments. I'd be really, really interested and eager to hear what you have to say and what you went through. But again, happy Halloween, thanks for watching, and try to give yourself a little scare.